want to talk to you about Adventist medical missionary work, and in particular, this first talk, I want to look at the foundation, the origin and scientific validity. And then the second talk at 5:30, after Elder Preby has presented about the real gospel and a better understanding of sin and the true and false, I want to talk to you then about the parallels in the medical missionary work with the true medical missionary work and a false medical missionary work. And then tomorrow we'll talk about, I will be talking about, let's not put asunder that which God hath joined together, talking about the medical missionary work and the gospel. Okay, let's see if this is working. Is there an on-off switch? The forward does not seem to be functioning. Okay, it's on, but okay, so it caught up to me. Let me. Or are you doing it for me? Okay. Well, this is the next slide, and I'm reading here about from third testimony. It says, "Close reasoners and logical thinkers are few, for the reason that false influences have checked the development of the intellect." And hopefully I'll have another. So the point I wanted to make here with this slide is to get, the first couple of slides, is the importance of careful thinking, close thinking. And thank you. Mm-hmm. We need to, do you realize that in Eden, the Bible tells us, and Ellen White elaborates on this fact, that Adam and Eve held converse with the creation. It says from the Leviathan in the waters to the mote and the sunbeam, that they held converse with creation. And while the curiosity that led Eve to partake of the forbidden fruit is certainly not the right kind of investigation or curiosity, it is correct for us to have converse with. The point is that it could not be talking about acute episodic medicine, because I'm sure that you would agree with me that we could not say that soon there will be no work done in ministerial lines but acute episodic medicine. It's ridiculous. I mean, those two are totally incompatible. Would you not agree? So it may include acute or episodic medicine, but it's larger in scope with a totally different emphasis. Something else that's so important is that medical missionary work is something that every Christian can do. Notice here from 7 testimonies written in 1902, every member of the church should take hold of medical missionary work. The world is a lazar house of sickness, filled with victims of both physical and spiritual disease. Everywhere people are perishing for lack of a knowledge of the truths that have been committed to us. You know what that says to me right there, stopping just a minute? It says that I am in some sense responsible for those who are perishing, that they're perishing for a lack of the knowledge that God has given me. The members of the church are in need of an awakening, that they may realize their responsibility to impart these truths. Health reform is to stand out more prominently in the proclamation of the third angel's message. The principles of health reform are found in the Word of God. The gospel of health is to be firmly linked with the ministry of the word. It is the Lord's design that the restoring influence of health reform shall be a part of the last great effort to proclaim the gospel. Could hardly get more central than that. The work of the true medical missionary is largely spiritual work. We sometimes miss this thought and think of medical missionary work as though it was physical. Yes, it includes physical, but it is largely and primarily a spiritual work. It includes prayer and the laying on of hands. Those who are selected to act the part of missionary physicians are to be set apart as such. The medical work done in connection with the giving of the third angel's messages to accomplish wonderful results. It is to be a sanctifying, unifying work corresponding to the work which the great head of the church sent forth the first disciples to do. What is that describing? Is that not describing the Great Commission? Talking about the great head of the church sent forth the first disciples. And it was, if you read it, you will see it was to preach and to heal and to minister. You know, many Christians, and I'm sympathetic to this, are very concerned about abortion and all the lives that are aborted. Do you realize there are more children in danger than are being aborted? There's more deaths in the United States caused by or contributed to by obesity than cancer. I don't know how bad it's going to have to get before we will wake up. It is our biggest problem. Dr. Ludwig from Johns Hopkins University and his colleagues published in the New England Journal in 2005 an article, and Dr. Carmona mentioned this, we all mentioned this, that after 200 years of increasing life expectancy in the United States, this generation promises to be the first generation with a shorter lifespan than their parents. We're spending more money than we have ever spent on health care. I could say we're also spending more money on junk food than we've ever, and there is a connection. But anyway, we're spending more money than ever, and we're losing ground. We're going backwards. Do you realize that the greater the density of health care in a geographical area, the lower the lifespan? There's some credible logic to the idea that the best way to actually help America's health would be to get rid of the medical care rather than trying to make everyone have it. And hopefully by the end of this afternoon's talk, not this one, but the second one, you're going to actually see some of the connections that has to do with the gospel and the true gospel. Now, you know about the Adventist Health Study. One, they compared about 34,000 Adventists to other people living in California. They found that eating vegetables, eating nuts, and drinking plenty of water, each one of those separately, were found to reduce the risk of heart disease by as much as 50%. This was actually quite surprising, frankly. It was thought that nuts, being high-fat food, would actually contribute to heart disease. It was an amazement that it actually reduces the risk of heart disease. And water, my goodness, what can water do? You realize it's possible, it may be, that the water with which you take the aspirin may do as much good for your heart disease as the aspirin. And lifespans in this study were clearly correlated with plant food intake. The more plant food and the more exclusively plant food eaten, the longer the lifespan tended to be. There's the citations in 1992 and 2002. Here was the chart that they showed, but I want to animate it for you, so let me do it to show you this tin. So if we put the survival of Californians, and what this is the percent that are still alive at various ages, okay? And what we find is that Adventists had the same number of people surviving or at 10 years older. So at 60, they had the same number of people as the average Californians at 50. So that's how we calculate and say have an extra 10 years lifespan. What is what? This is survival. So this is the percent, 1%. 100% were alive at 30. So we started with people at 30 to eliminate the effect of infant mortality, and then how long it takes them to die. Dr. Paffenbarger, he's from Stanford University. He worked on the Adventist health study. Notice what he said. Adventists are a national treasure for health research because of their diet. He says even their meats are veggie meats. And this was, you can find this citation in the report from 2003. So that the rigorous studies show that Seventh-day Adventists live healthier, longer lives, while the health and longevity are declining in the general population. Why? Because Adventists adopted and taught health reform in the mid-1800s. Now, let's think about this closely for a moment. Now, here's a picture of the Battle Creek Sanitarium. It was originally named this in 1878, but this picture we're seeing is the rebuilt one, which was not the original building, but Battle Creek Sanitarium. Actually, the forerunner was the Western Health Reform Institute. Maybe you've seen this picture. Started in 1866. This was before Dr. Kellogg even had taken his medical training. So these health principles in the mid-1800s, they were not from the medical experts. You realize medicine just discovered the germ theory in 1863. We just stopped bleeding for what we consider to be fever or not long after George Washington, somewhere around 1800 was when bleeding as a treatment. I mean, does that sound strange to you? It sounds strange to us today to think that they actually used to bleed people who had fevers to cure them. And you know, it actually always worked, they say. It always worked. The problem was sometimes the patient died. But it always did lower the fever. So the point I want you to get is that these principles, we're looking at how did this treasure come to be? How did this happen? It didn't come from medical experts or medical science. If we'd followed that, we'd have been smoking for lung issues. They were still telling people, even in the late 1800s, early 1900s, some, that you should smoke to help with your lung conditions. It also was not from epidemiological studies, such as the Adventist health study. Those epidemiological studies didn't begin until in the 1900s. And so it wasn't based on science, was it? What was it based on? It's actually drawn from the writings of the author of the book Ministry of Healing. And she said that she got it from God. And the question that we have and that you have with those that you ministered to is to answer this question. Where does this come from? Why do you teach these principles? What is their validity? Now, really, they can be summarized from page 127 of that book. Is often this is used to show the 8 natural remedies: nutrition, exercise, water, sunshine, temperance, air, rest, trust in divine power, commonly called New Start. And of course, there's more to it than just those 8, but those 8 do a lovely job of summarizing it. Don McMahon, doctor from down in Australia, had pondered this question: where did this information come from? How did this treasure happen, as Dr. Paffenbarger called it? And he tells how, if you read his book, Acquired or Inspired, he tells how, as he was in medical school, he was teased mercilessly by his classmates for his vegetarian lifestyle. Because Don had been raised as a Seventh-day Adventist from a child up. And at his 25th class reunion, he got to talking with some of his friends, and they actually apologized to him. You know, Don, we really feel badly for how we treated you and teased you, and actually many of them had adopted a more plant-based diet and were recommending it to their patients. And they asked Don, they said, but how did you know 25 years ago that our nutrition professor was full of baloney? Because he said that you were going to destroy your health with that diet. And it's a fact. Don tells the story. He was picked out and singled out in class as an illustration of a disastrous diet by the professor. And so they asked him this question: how did you know this 25 years ago? And Don tells that by that point in his Christian experience, he had, I just had a terror moment. I just realized that the clock is not at all correct. So somebody's going to have to give me some sense of timing here. So, thank you very much. I need to know when it's 3:15. No, I don't. It's 5 to 3? Okay, yeah, 3:15 is when he told me. Is that right, Elder Preby? 3:15. I go to, that's what he, okay. So he tells that his Christian experience had waned a bit, and he was not going to church regularly, and he had sort of gotten away from, in many ways, away from his, shall we say, fervor of his faith. And he really got to thinking about this question, and he realized that the reason that he was a vegetarian in medical school was simply because his father had accepted the Seventh-day Adventist faith, had read the writings of Ellen White, and had adopted vegetarianism and raised him as a vegetarian. I mean, if you really look at it, that's the fact, that's why he was a vegetarian. And so he began to think about this, and he was well aware, as I'm sure many of you are, that people have pointed out, well, this author is a house of cards. She's got no inspiration. She borrowed and plagiarized and all these complaints about it. And so he said, you know, I really puzzled over this, and then it hit me that I could do something about it. And he realized that the fact that she borrowed was a powerful tool for investigating the possible inspiration of her book. Now follow this if you're not familiar with it. This is very interesting. He realized that there was a possibility of selective borrowing and that could be measured and analyzed scientifically. And what he did was he did an 8-year investigation or study of these things. You see, the increase in knowledge over time, I think we all agree that knowledge over time increases. Sometimes we think we know something and then science proves it wrong and we have to back up. But overall, we're going forward. So it becomes an imperfect measure of validity and the longer the period of time you do this, the more accurate and scientific knowledge improves, expands. Ideas with greater validity tend to be verified over time. Things less valid are refuted. So this basic premise that I think we would all agree to. And so what he did was he compared the validity of things that were written in the book Ministry of Healing to the validity of things written by others that the author had borrowed from. Now, if it was random borrowing, if there was no guidance, then the validity would be no difference in the validity of what was borrowed from what had been left behind, what was not borrowed. But selective borrowing should produce a difference. Now, if you're into statistics, you'll love this. If you're not, please bear with me. It's very important you understand what this is proving. So what he did was he found, of course, that the sources, her primary sources of borrowing from what was in her library and what she said in her own writings. Now, some of you are familiar perhaps with Sylvester Graham. He was a Presbyterian minister in the 1800s, and that's what we get our graham crackers. They're named after Mr. Graham. I think he would probably refute that if he were, because what he made was definitely not cookies. He made graham breads. They were very hearty, shall we say. And he wrote lectures on the science of human life in the 1850s, and Ellen White had a copy of that book in her library, as she had books from these individuals, Dr. Alcott, Dr. Coles, Dr. Jackson. And so what Dr. McMahon did was, he took the worst case scenario. He said, let's assume that everything that's in the book Ministry of Healing was borrowed from everything that's in her book that's in one of the other books, let's just assume she borrowed it. Now, there's no guarantee that's the case, but that would be the worst case scenario. So if there's anything in the book Ministry of Healing that's in the book by Coles, we're going to assume that that was borrowed. Okay, and then what he did, he identified every distinct teaching in these 5 books. You can see why it was an 8-year process. And he separated them, whether they were of major or minor importance to health, and he classified them as either verified by modern science or not. And he had 3 colleagues who were physicians also with a good broad knowledge that he had to do the same thing. So it wasn't just his evaluation of modern science, it was a group of them, of physicians. And he calculated a validity score. That's the percent considered verified. So what percent of what Sylvester Graham had written in the 1850s is now considered verified by science? What percent of what Coles had written was considered verified? And what percent of Ministry of Healing was considered verified? He compared what the author had borrowed to what was not borrowed. Borrowed material had much higher validity than the sources it had been borrowed from. The selectivity of borrowing was 11 standard deviations from the null. If you know anything about statistics, it actually takes an expert to calculate the odds. That's such an unusual number. The odds of it being the result of mere chance were 1 in 1.4 to 10 to the 35th power. That's more than the number of bodies in the universe. It's an incalculable number, basically. So let me just show you the chart, the graph. Here's the items considered verified, and Graham had 42%, of which about half were minor and a little over half of the verified ones are major, and we don't know about. So he had 42%. Alcott, 35%. You can see he had quite a few more items that he had, but still not many more verified. Well, actually less percentage-wise. Not sure what I do wrong here. Coles had 40%. Let me move on this side. Jackson, 42%. And then Ministry of Healing had 87%. And I want you to see something else. Do you notice something about the dark green, right, is the significant items? Notice just 20, 25 or so, under 20, 20-some. And here, it's almost 50. Ministry of Healing had a higher number of significant items than the others. But overall, it was 87%. You can see right away a significant difference, can you not? Notice something else about the verification rate over time. He looked at the verification rate in 1960 and compared it to 2000. I'm sorry the graph is printing a little funny here, but this is 59% in 1960 and 87% it had come to in 2000. So who knows what it will be in 2040, another 40 years. But the point is that as science is advancing, more and more of the principles that were enumerated on health in the book Ministry of Healing are being validated and verified. And we don't have time to go into it, but a part of the reason for that is the science that's being done on Seventh-day Adventists. Let me just stop a minute and just think about this a second. Rather than Adventist lifestyle principles being based on science, science is basing its knowledge on Adventist lifestyle principles. Adventist lifestyle principles are being validated by epidemiology and opening new fields of understanding about the value of lifestyle practices, nuts being one example. Loma Linda was the first study that showed that nuts were healthful, and yet when they went and looked at the Nurses' Health Study, the Iowa Women's Health Study, all of these other studies found, sure enough, that's right, nuts are helpful. But they had never even thought to look at it because it was so clearly a high-fat food, it would be dangerous. So what I'm saying to you is part of the reason that this is happening over time is because the Adventist lifestyle health principles are informing modern science rather than the other way around. I could belabor this. I think I need to move on. This is just some more data looking at this. You can find it in the book there. Here's one that's very interesting. All right, this is, I'm going to show you this one. This is if it's a principle that was in all four, right? There's safety in a multitude of counselors. So if all four of those authors had that principle, there was only like 38 of them. But 66% were considered verified. So there is safety in a multitude of counselors. However, notice what happened if it was in Ministry of Healing. If she borrowed it, the rate went from 66 to 82%. So even among those, she was able to borrow the ones that were valid. If it was all of them agreed, but she did not borrow, it was only 20% have been considered verified. And of course, by leaving it out, she didn't say it wasn't important. She just didn't say it was part of what God had shown her. So, as I said, the odds of making this kind of selection was 11.1 standard deviations. This is more certain than a DNA test. I don't know what analogy to use for you, but it cannot be a random event. This definitely is the result of selective guided borrowing. That's assuming she borrowed. And if she didn't borrow, well, then it's a fact of de novo inspiration. So this book and the research that he did on it, Don tells in his book how it actually reinvigorated. It gave him a revival and reformation. And he is a vibrant Adventist Christian today. In fact, he says, by the way, if you're interested, he says he will go anywhere and talk about his research at his cost. So if you want him to come and speak about it, he told me, I go anywhere in the world and talk about my work and my experience. Anyway, here's a little quote that I'm sure you're maybe familiar with from page 296 of that book. Grains, fruits, nuts, and vegetables constitute the diet chosen for us by Creator, Genesis 1:29, right? These foods, prepared in as simple and natural a manner as possible, are the most healthful and nourishing. You know, beer and pretzel, that's vegan, right? You know, you can be a vegan and live on beer and pretzels. My point is, being vegan is not what it's about. It's about plant foods prepared in as simple and natural manner as possible and eaten with a variety of foods in season, etc. I talked about this before, so I'm only doing this as a review. If you weren't here, there is actually on the internet, there's a talk. But I want to remind you now about another piece of the science. This was January 18, 2010, Time magazine. And the whole issue was on why your DNA isn't your destiny. Now you think, well, what's this got to do? If you haven't heard this before, you're thinking, well, what's this got to do with what we were just talking about? Let me show you the connection. The science of epigenetics, friends, is the current cutting edge of science that's validating the health message given to the Seventh-day Adventists. Epigenetics is so new that I gave a talk on this, by the way, back in April, and there was a gentleman there who talked to me afterwards. He says, I feel like Rip Van Winkle. He says, I've got a PhD in biochemistry. How did I not know anything about this? And I says, this is only 5 years old. This is brand new. He graduated a few years before that. And what it is doing, so I want you to see it. It reveals how the choices we make can change our genes and those of our kids. These are little hedgehogs, right? That's what these are. And it was interesting, down in Australia, I gave this talk in Australia, they don't have hedgehogs. And not many people knew what that was. But of course, if they would have shown me a Tasmanian devil, I wouldn't know what that was either. But anyway, I show this little picture to remind me, that where we all come from, right? There's an ovum from mom's ovary, combines with sperm from dad. These two join together, and we have a complete set of 23 chromosomes in a cell, all right? That cell then begins to divide and becomes more and more and more cells, and in 9 months, we're born. And every cell in your body is a duplicate of that first cell, correct? And every cell in our body has a complete set of the 23 chromosomes, half that came from mom, half from dad. Now, I have a question for you. If every cell in our body, has a copy of the same DNA, how does it make such different things? How is it some of it makes an ear, some of it a toe, some makes a brain? Do you realize that all the cells to make a liver are in the cells of your ear? Aren't you glad they're turned off? See, most genes in every cell in your body are turned off. There's about 30,000 genes in the human genome, and most of them are turned off so that only the right ear genes are turned on right here. Not the left ear, the right ear. There's a different set of genes for the left ear. And we have now discovered, and that's what epigenetics is about in a nutshell. Epigenetics, epi upon genome, the epigenetics are the switches that control the turning on and turning off of genes in a nutshell. And science is just excited as can be, geneticists especially, in studying this, because what would you do? What do you do? Have you ever gone into a new house or a new home or somewhere and you're looking around and you find a switch that doesn't seem to do anything, right? You turn that switch and so you tell your wife, go out and check, go watch it, see if it's the light in the driveway. And you just, what does that switch do? So geneticists are just excited as they can be. They found all these new switches and trying to figure out which switches do what. And in a nutshell, what the science has shown is that the most powerful way to change the switch settings, are you ready for this? Is food. The most powerful modulator of gene expression is diet. And maybe close behind it is exercise. And a recent study on exercise showed that the switch settings in your body change within 20 minutes of exercise. I don't know how soon they change after food. We haven't measured that yet. But we know there are more gene switch settings changed from our food than anything else that we've discovered, and science is busy working on it. I don't have time to talk about that. I'm going to go to a different one. I want to tell you this one. What's the time again? 12 after. Okay, I've got 3 minutes. This is a study that was done in rats, published in 2008, the Journal of Neuroscience. In this study, they fed a pregnant rat a high-fat diet. This is a diet that you could get at any fast food place in town. It's within reach, in walking distance, almost anywhere in the United States. They fed about 50% calories from fat. They were able to track the effect that diet in the mother was having on gene expression in the baby. Now, we're not talking about, it was changing the switch settings in her, but this study was looking at the change in the switch settings in the developing fetus. And they found that on chromosome 3, the short arm of chromosome 3 in the developing babies, there was it caused an overexpression, it's called neurogenesis, an overexpression that caused there to be anatomical differences in the brain of this developing rat. It had more neurons at the base of the brain that were produced because of the mother's diet, and when these cells took up their residence in the base of the brain, they happened to be neurohormonally active. They were expressing peptides that were sending hormone signals to the organism. What were those signals causing? The signals were causing an increased blood lipids. In human terms, we'd say they had high cholesterol and high triglycerides. It was causing a greater intake. They were prone to eat more calories than if they had been born to a mother not eating this diet. They preferred fat. They preferred fat in their diet more than the others. They had early puberty onset. They were advanced in sexual development unnaturally, and they had greater body weight. Do you recognize that profile, by the way? Friends, there is a physiologic connection between the profile of obesity, early puberty, grade school pregnancy, and high-fat diet. These are connected in humans, just as they are in other mammals. And in this, this is not only a medical phenomena or a physiologic phenomena. This is a spiritual, this has a spiritual dimension. And I want to suggest to you, and I hope that I get a chance to show you a little bit to back this up, that without the spiritual, I'm not sure this problem is solvable. It's like a positive feedback loop. You know, pregnancy is a positive feedback loop. When its time comes, as the baby drops, it's a process that leads to delivery. It doesn't stop. And there's good indications that what's happening with, do you realize we are increasingly seeing hypertension in grade school children? We're seeing what used to be called adult onset diabetes in grade school children. Of course, we have it in high school, but now it's getting into the American Academy of Pediatrics released a report a year or two ago that was shocking. And they said that pediatricians should start screening obese children at age 2 and start statin medications by age 8. We cannot afford this. We cannot afford it financially. We cannot afford it health-wise. We cannot afford it productivity-wise. We simply cannot. This will not happen. I mean, I can tell you, it will not happen. It will implode. The system, the society will implode if we don't fix this. Now, I've got to end. So I'm wanting to tie a couple of knots, and then I'm going to stop this talk. I'll pick up a little later. I believe that, let's connect the dots. We've been told that the world is suffering as a result, and perishing, she said, as a result of a lack of knowledge that's been committed to us. We have been told, and we have as a church largely lived a different lifestyle enough that it has caused an epidemiological phenomena that shows that there's a benefit to living an Adventist lifestyle. But we need to realize that it's not for just us. The world needs what we have. And they're finding it. They're going to find it somewhere. And I'm hoping that they'll find it from us. Let me skip through here. I want to show you this slide, and then I'm going to stop. This is from Dr. Jerdel. He's one of the pioneers. His lab did the study on the agouti mouse. I skipped that study. But he says, epigenetics is proving we have some responsibility for the integrity of our genome. Before epigenetics, genes predetermine outcomes. Now everything we do, everything we eat or smoke can affect our gene expression and that of future generations. Epigenetics introduces the concept of free will into our idea of genetics. And I just wanted to mention for Elder Preby that free will is an essential component of understanding sin and the gospel, is it not? And as he's going to share with us. And I think I just love the way that science in the field of medicine and physiology is confirming much of the health message that God has connected with the gospel.